Right. My name Robert Spoonemore, and I was born in Hobbs, New Mexico.
And where did you go to school?
My father was in the oil field. I went to school several places. I was even a migrant, I guess you might say. But I ended up in the Panhandle and graduated from Spearman High School, and then went to West Texas State, which is near Amarillo. There in the Panhandle. Got married when I graduated and went to California for 1 year, but stayed 6 and got a master's degree there at California State College in Los Angeles.
So what has your role been in the Pflugerville community?
Well, in May of 1981, the Pflugerville School Board offered me the superintendent's position, which I accepted. The 9 years previous to that, I'd been serving as superintendent in a small cotton farming town near Lubbock, and my family and I moved down here in the middle of June of 1981.
What was your first impression of the community, and what made you decide this was the place you wanted to have your career?
Well, I'd always liked Central Texas. Of course, that was part of it, and I'd enjoyed Austin. But Pflugerville was pretty unique, and I drug my wife down here away from her mother, who lived up in that area where we were, and that took some dragging, but she's still here with me, however many years later this is, since 1981. But when I got to town here, well, one of the first things I did as an employee of the school district was hire Larry Bradley as high school principal. The previous high school principal had taken a small school superintendent's job, and brought Larry in, and he worked here longer than I did, for that matter. But when we got here, there were 3 houses for sale in Pflugerville. He bought one, I bought the other one, and I don't know what happened to the third one. We bought one over there south of the current Baptist church, and we remember, well, the house was nice and so on. The streets weren't really paved. It had a little occasional patch of paving out in the street, but not really real paving, and did not have curbs and gutters, certainly not sidewalks. It had only had city sewage for a couple of years. For that matter, we put in a swimming pool and dug up the septic tank in the backyard of that house on 18th Street, but several years later we moved to the other side of town in the Saxony subdivision, and that's where we reside now. So I brought my wife Glenda down here, and she had some serious reservations. There's no shopping in Pflugerville when we came. There's one little shopping center there at the corner of Railroad and Pecan Street. They really didn't have anything in it for shopping, but it's the closest thing they had to a shopping center. Had more bars than it did anything else. That matter, when we came to town, it was called Marshall's Tavern at that time, and located across from the big Shell station there at the corner of First Street and Pecan Street. It had a gigantic big paper mache armadillo on top of it. And I think it was a remnant from one of the first or second Duchenfest parades that they had. And that was a pretty imposing sight to drive down the street and see this 20-foot long armadillo up on top of this building. Well, the building is still there. It's still a bar, but the armadillo went away several years ago, but that was something that certainly caught your attention when you drove through Pflugerville at that time. Where the big fire department and Pfluger Hall's concept is softball fields at that time. My kids played there. I'll bet yours did too. And I remember those out there, and I even remember some discussion when the fire department eventually took that over, who that belonged to. And that was kind of interesting. You go around the corner there on Main Street. There weren't very many businesses on Main Street. Still not a lot, but there was Phoebe's Lumber Yard, which has since turned into an adult entertainment center, we'll call. Now, not in the X-rated type, but they play volleyball and a lot of things there. But it really was a lumber yard. Now, it was only Hanovers for a very short period of time compared to some of the actual history of it. But that's been a kind of a center of downtown Pflugerville. On the east end of Main Street, there's wordyisms there now, and it was the post office at that time. And I don't remember any businesses in that little string of buildings on the south side of Main Street, but they're picturesque, unique looking buildings. But when you drove into Pflugerville from the west, which we did when I brought my wife down here, from what is now Spring Hill Catfish Place, which was old Spanish Trail Mexican food place at that time, there wasn't anything. I mean, there wasn't anything until you got to Pflugerville High School. It was pasture on both sides. And then when we got here, she and I talked about this. I thought the city limit side said 444. She said it was less than that. Well, I don't know where the truth lies, but it amounts to there weren't very many people who lived in Pflugerville. For many, many years, I don't know the exact turnover time. When school was in session, we would have more students in Pflugerville High School than lived in Pflugerville. And that went on for a long time, really, until Pflugerville actually started annexing property, which they did a few years later. That's probably remained a truth. And so anyway, we joined the Baptist Church that June when we got to town. It's located over there on 10th Street. Had an auditorium that served about 100 people, and now it's probably, I don't know the exact seating in the current auditorium, but it's probably 1,500 people would be a good guess, and sort of dominates the whole community when you came in. And whenever we moved to town here, there weren't very many people except Lutherans. Lots and lots of Lutherans. And that was a wonderful thing. We enjoyed getting to know them because where we came from in far west Texas, there weren't very many Lutherans, you know. But there also weren't very many Baptists right here. Now there's a lot of Baptists, a lot more Catholics, a lot of everything else. But the Lutherans are still one of the main strengths of the community. The district I came from in West Texas, out near Lubbock, was 100% cotton district. In other words, that's the only thing they did, the people who lived there. And predominantly Mexican-American, Hispanic, because they worked in the cotton fields. And I was used to that and enjoyed my relationship when I got here. And I remember the first day when school was going on and I went over and visited Pflugerville Elementary School. Here were all these blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids. It was culture shock, really. When you come from a district where 2 out of 3 kids are Mexican-American and you come to one where at that time, probably was 90% were Anglo. And that was a very definite adjustment, you know. Not an unpleasant one, but it was an adjustment. And I realized that that's been a significant difference in Pflugerville over the past, 35 years that I've been hanging around here, how that has changed and moved in other directions. Once again, my wife complained about the shopping. Go to the grocery store, you had to go down at Runberg and Lamar if you went that direction. Or there were 2 in Round Rock up on, I guess it's Highway 79. One of them's a Chuck E. Cheese now, I think, or something like that. But it was certainly no clothing store. And that took a long time to come, but there was no grocery store either. Not much of anything else in the way of shopping, but that has changed dramatically in recent years. And
your wife also opened her own business. You want to talk about?
Well, after we had been here a few years, well, actually about 6 months after we got here, she started working some over in Round Rock at a beauty salon. She had gotten her license in Lubbock shortly before we left Rawls out near Lubbock. But after we'd been here a few months and got settled in, well, she started working there. And then when Audrey and Leonard Deering opened their business there on 1825. I think that's in the 400 or 500 block there. We decided that we'd jump off and open up a business there, and I named it. She let me do that, and that's the only thing I got to do, you know, other than pay for the bills. And
the name was?
we named it the Hair Fair, Fair with a P, P-F-A-I-R, and she ran that business for a year, 18 months after I retired, and at least from the superintendent's job in 1999, and then I more or less forced her to retire.
So that PF has become kind of the brand of Pflugerville now. And it started way back then. You had the PF in Pflugerville, but the PF in Fair.
Well, that's true. I remember back at Pflugerville High School in those days, something strange went on periodically. People would go to their mailbox maybe, and it was their birthday, and they'd get a birthday card, or some good would happen in their family, and they'd get a notification of that. They might get the occasional little gift or cookie, and there would usually be signed, the note signed by it, the Pflugerville Phantom. And nobody ever knew who the Pflugerville Phantom was. But I think she probably still exists in Pflugerville and is doing good deeds for the Pflugerville School District and the community as a whole. But that was gave everybody a good feeling there at Pflugerville High School.
So talk about some of your experiences as superintendent. Obviously, it was nearly 96 square miles of community to the east, to the west. The growth came. You have to find land sites.
Well, actually, whenever I came, there were more people who lived in Austin than lived in Pflugerville. We go down to Walnut Creek, straight south of town here, which is across Palmer Lane and on down there. And to the southwest, we go to Kramer Lane on North Lamar, which is just a block or two south of Breaker Lane, and then go all the way over to Metric. So we go way to the southwest, and there were lots and lots of kids there. And all of those people had been bringing their kids, or we bused them from as far away, you know, as Breaker Lane, west of Highway 35, to the three schools that were in existence whenever I came. We had an elementary school, which Pflugerville Elementary School, then a middle school, which was here on 1825, and now is Timmerman Elementary School, and then Pflugerville High School, and all of the kids came here. We were running a lot of busing because more kids lived over there than did here in Pflugerville. And so right before I came, just a couple of months, they'd passed a bond issue for $4 million. And with that $4 million, we built Palmer Lane Elementary School, a high school gymnasium, and the administration building, which we used for 18 or 19 years. Can't do that on $4 million anymore. So that was an exposure into, well, I had built a high school in West Texas, but I got that put on me right quick, and was doing it when I left.
Did you do Pflugerville Elementary over on Dessau Road, which is now Manual Road?
Did the addition, which was on the west side, the kindergarten wing, we did that, but no.
It was already there.
Yeah, I think probably the superintendent immediately preceding me did that.
Hyman.
Yeah, right, Kermit Hyman, you know.
Okay. But then Palmer Lane, you built that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
We bid it, and you know.
There was always this idea of I-35 splitting the district, which was something we had to work on.
Well, and it was particularly kind of sensitive at that time, it seemed to me to be. They felt like, in a way, they weren't getting their share. And you can understand why. The three schools that we had were all over here. And yet most of the people were there. Of course, now I don't know, it is probably 20–25% of the people who live over there now. It lessened, I felt like, when we built Conley High School, and that was done under my tenure. and they kind of felt like that they had theirs. They could go K-12, on the west side of 35. I'm sure it's a challenge now because it was like 3 years or something we had, trying to think how long after we finished Conley that I left. It was about 3 years or so. But I'm sure it's a challenge now to not have the feeling of two separate school districts, because west of 35, you have the high school, you have a middle school, and you have 3 elementary schools. That's a nice little school district. That's bigger than most school districts in the state of Texas, if you really want to know the truth. 1,100 school districts, that's probably bigger than a lot of them. So that would be a continued challenge, and those people seem like it. And I think whenever I got here, there was a school board member, an attorney, who lived on the west side, and he may have been the first one. No, there was another one ahead of him, but there weren't a lot who had been elected from over there. And
one of the tricks is finding the sites. So what was your method of going out and finding the site to put a school and making the deal work?
That was one of the most difficult things that I did. And me and another staff member worked at it a lot, because if you wait until after the developer has the property platted and drawn out, and they've done all that engineering and that work, they're not really too interested in selling you at a price that a school district wishes to pay for a site that they've already invested this much money on. And they see where they can make a whole lot more money on building 100 houses on this little property than they can to, putting one school on it. Just doggedness and perseverance. And I threatened, when I say I, the school board supported me, of course, threatened one family there about a site where they built Dell Computer later on as a place for a high school down in that direction. But we found this other site where Conley is now, and while it was full of problems of being long and narrow and pretty good slope on it, we made it work, and we did not have to condemn the property and take it away from that family. So never got into that, but that is a threat. But developers, some of them like to have schools on their property, others don't care. And when I talk about developers, that's what I dealt with mostly. But farmers, some don't mind, losing some that they've lived on for all of their life. Others really don't want to give it up for family reasons, and I can understand that, but it's just something that takes a lot of work. And like I said, one of the harder things I did, and spent an amazing amount of time working on that for the 12 or 15 schools I was involved building.
Another part of your role was staying up with the ever-changing state laws, mandates, funding, and keeping the resources, the dollars, that everything balanced.
There's 7 school districts in Travis County. For much of the tenure that I served, we were the poorest school district. People think, oh, well, you can't be poorer than Del Valley. You can't be poorer than Manor. I didn't say our kids were poor. I said the school district was poor because we didn't have any industry. All we had was houses and farmland. And both Manor and Del Valley had industry of some sort or another. Then, of course, Austin is Austin, and certainly Ames has got plenty of money. That's not an issue for them. But we were on the bottom end as far as amount of taxable wealth behind each child. And it was that way for the majority of the time. I don't know where they stand now. There are a lot of things in Pflugerville that were not here whenever I retired. But that was a problem. Now, the state adjusts for some of it, but they don't adjust for near enough. And they've never got that funding formula down very good. When I came, we were losing a lot of teachers to Round Rock the first year and the year before and so on. And I made it my goal to keep up with Round Rock and Leander on salaries. And it got to where I emphasized that and trying to take care of the teachers, and made Leander and Round Rock mad, because pretty soon we was stealing teachers from them, and we got a number from them. And I'm kind of proud of that, frankly, because I thought that's where you need to put your money. 80% of the school budget goes to teachers, and it's money well spent.
Pflugerville has always been noted for its high standard of education, and that is because of the leaders. How did you maintain that? How did you acquire that? The students were able to go to college and do well. When they went to competitions, they did well. What was the secret?
I think we just expected it. We didn't expect to lose. We weren't expecting to win when we had entered an academic contest, or on what we expected of our kids when they graduated. It's high expectations, and if your students think this is what I'm supposed to do, most of them will try to meet those expectations. And one of the things that some administrators and some school board members and I experienced, we'd have a lot of people move out here from Austin or from way off, and then start complaining about the way we did it. They move here for the schools because they heard we had good schools. And then they'd say, well, that's not the way we did it some other place, And I said, well, why did you move here? Because of the good schools. Well, maybe you need to go back to the other place where you weren't happy. And that was always a challenge, is to get them where they had the same expectations that we did.
You mentioned graduation. So what do you look at graduations over the 18 years? How did they, any that were memorable or venue changing?
Well, I remember the very first one that we had, and they weren't what I was used to. They weren't what Larry Bradley was used to. And we worked on it. There was a lot more horseplay going on in graduation, and we kind of felt like it was a fairly solemn, serious event, and we worked pretty hard at it after that to try to return that solemnity back to graduation. Now, that doesn't mean they can't hoop and holler when it's over and have a great time, but that was a real challenge at first, and they had more fun than we thought was appropriate for the event.
So they started on the football field, and then with the increasing growth?
Well, yeah, the first graduation we had was on the football field, and the home side was the east side at that time, and they had the most stands, and faced into that hot sun, and that wasn't too good. But we'd had some others inside. We finished the library to the big expansion to the high school. When I moved here, I think the high school had about 500 capacity, and it's got, I think, 2,400 capacity now. So we expanded that thing all that could be expanded, But one expansion included the current library, cafeteria. And we had graduation in that cafeteria. And we were at about 120% capacity on it, but we crammed everybody in there, showed off our
Fire chief?
Showed off our new facility and had graduation too, but we weren't able to do it. I remember now, that was in '87.
It was.
And then in '86, rain was threatening. I believe that was the reason, and we had it inside the new gym we had added. And I remember that particularly because I presented a plaque to Jack and Nellie Anderwatha, making them honorary graduates of Pflugerville High School for donating 126 acres to the school district at that graduation.
Right.
But they moved a few years later down into Austin at the University of Texas, and it went much better and was worth the money, and good money well spent there.
As the district grew, the needs grew, and one of the programs that was added was the school nurse program. Do you remember that?
Well, actually, Gretchen Kemple was the first school nurse the district ever had. She was here before I was, just barely. And then it got to be fairly standard that as we started adding schools, we added nurses to the program. And I don't know if they still have a nurse on nearly every campus, but I suspect they do.
You also have seen the age of the computers coming in, and that was an ongoing budget issue or bond issue, however you dealt with. How did you deal with the computers?
Well, it was kind of demanded upon us in a way. The early years I was here, farmers were a major occupation still, not the largest, I don't think. Probably teachers and educators were the highest occupation. A lot of people worked for the state, but also a lot of people worked for IBM that were in here. Partly is that the west side of the district over there was where the big IBM plant was in the early years. That's back in the 80s. And we started getting a little pressure. You know, y'all need to start doing more for computers. Well, and nobody was doing much for computers. Then I started bugging the principals. Hey, here's your budget. You need to buy some computers with it. Or particularly in the elementary schools, they bought lots and lots and lots of computers with PTO raised money, you know. And they probably bought more there than they did out of the school budget. And we just started emphasizing that. But we came in a little bit ahead of the curve there because it would have been in the mid-80s. The University of Texas called me up and said, we're offering a computer class down here this summer, but we don't have any computers. Can we borrow yours? And we let them borrow 20-something computers to go down to the University of Texas for them to teach their computer class on. And I thought, well, they probably don't want that advertised. But it is a fact.
One of the things that happened, again, over the period of time was the Pflugerville band started to grow and probably reached its maximum at Pflugerville High School, and the bands went to Rose Bowl, Fiesta Bowl. Was that during your time period?
Well, I feel certainly not to downplay what they're doing now. I've seen the bands, and they have very good bands. But I felt like for a few years there, with the late Doug Kincaid leading them, they were about as good as a high school band could get, and about as good as I ever saw, pushing 400 people. We moved the stands down to the south end for them, and they liked it. You know, considered it home down there. But I understand that's not popular now with some of the people. But we had tremendous bands. They were in the Rose Bowl and just became kind of an automatic one when they went to contest, you know, in Texas and the state. Yeah, we just were fortunate about having an outstanding band director at that time, and he took us along.
Being the decision maker where the buck stops, there were calls you had to make regarding weather. What were some of those, and you have no control over weather situations. How tell us about making those decisions. What weighed in on your mind? And
if the buses could run, we'd have weather. It wasn't me that made the decision, it was the guy who drove the school bus. But he called me for approval.
okay.
And I spent several mornings, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning out driving and seeing if I agreed with him on whether or not they could go. And partly I guess that might have been some training out in West Texas where we do get a little bit more ice and snow than they do down here. But there would be many occasions when we could have school here in Pflugerville that they could not have school in Ames or a good part of Austin because of hills. You know, it's hard to go up a hill if it has ice on it, and we don't have all that many hills. Have a few low hills, but you know, we're pretty flat. And now, I did learn early on that if you get the kids at school, you keep them. You don't send them home when mama's not there. And once you get them here with 2 out of 3 parents working, you know, both parents working, you got to take that in consideration, that you send them home, what that kid's going to do when he gets off that bus. And so anyway, just make the decision early as you can, and if you let them come, keep them until going home time.
So what were your, some of your proudest moments in your 18 years with the school district?
Well, of course, we helped the school board get to be state honor board. That's a selected #1 school board in the state there in the 90s. And then, well, actually the year before that, I had been selected Superintendent of the Year for Central Texas, and I was personally proud of that. I was very involved with several other professional organizations that I managed to achieve some leadership and things of that type, and always try to do my part and stay involved and keep informed about what was going on there. And I guess that's mainly.
What about the challenges? What were some of the more difficult things you remember?
Well, having the program, paying the teachers, and having the things we needed on a difficult budget. As I mentioned, we were the poorest school district in the county for most of the years that I was here. That's certainly a challenge, you know, and you had to watch what you spent your money on. And there were a lot of things we would have liked to have had that we didn't have. But the hardest thing school superintendent's got to do is say no. Because, you know, that doesn't people don't love you if you say no. But that was the hardest thing I had to do. Of course, the obvious answer on that is growth, because we could see them coming, and they were coming. I had 2,000 kids when I got here and had 12,000 kids when we left, and we had to have a place for them, and you had to do it in advance. We were particularly proud, and I say we, the school board, and I at that time, we had, I think, 6 portable buildings when I left, and we tried to stay out of portables. Now, you can learn in a portable building and have good experiences there, but we just kind of made one of our standards is that we were going to try to have better facilities than portable buildings. Probably doesn't make a difference on test scores, but we were able to do that and had very few of those, and proud of that accomplishment.
So you had the privilege and responsibility of hiring your leaders, your team, whether they were in the administrative office or you know, on the campus level, and brought in some very good people. What were you looking for?
Boy, that's a tough question. I'm going a good, sharp individual who wants to have great schools. I mean, all the obvious answers would be that. When I came in 1981, there were the administration building was inside Pflugerville High School. The administration team was 5 people, 3 clerical people, and myself and Mr. Kemple, my assistant superintendent there, who had been a coach and principal in the district for 31 years. And we were it. And we added a lot of people, you know, not near as many as what they got now, but they got twice as many kids too. But as we added people, we tried to add people who could help us in our weakest spots, and that wanted to come, and started building a reputation where more people wanted to come to Pflugerville instead of just be a little country town out here. It changed into, we were competing with the big boys as far as test scores and academics and athletics was concerned, and they wanted to be part of it.
And then you had, with the growth came a wider array of student needs to deal with. So you had to start new programs, and particularly in the special education. I think you were known area-wise and maybe even statewide on how they were accommodated.
Special education was very difficult for me, and the few special ed directors I worked here. the federal law for a while there had written where districts were basically guilty of not providing for school districts unless proven innocent, kind of the reverse of the way it should have been. And we spent too much time on dealing with courts and lawyers and so on. And some of them, I'm not going to name any names, saw it as a honeypot in order to get money out of the school districts. Example, walk in and say, you got a problem with Miss Jones and her kid, give me $10,000 and it'll go away. That's a quote on one, but no names associated with it. And that was extremely difficult. During my tenure was the time that really special ed kids started being served more. I don't mean that's a bad thing, it's just a fact. And that means the school district were out a great deal of money that they may not have been during my generation of growing up, you know. And it's expensive whenever you maybe have this really special kid and he's got a teacher and an aide assigned to him, as we had for one particular child. Now, state and federal pays some of that, but they don't pay 100% of it. But it was a real challenge, and I don't know where it stands right now. Been gone long enough that I've forgotten that, thank goodness. But special ed was a challenge to meet the standards and provide for the children.
There were always fundraisers. Every organization came along with trying to get money, make money, so that they could do what they wanted to do. A lot of parental support. Any comments in that whole category, from PTOs all the way up to your band boosters?
Well, we particularly noticed that when my family and I moved down here from where we were, the enthusiasm that the parents had for the school and the support that they had, the involvement that they had was a great deal more so than what we were used to. And it was pleasant, you know. It was nice to get nice notes from parents about things that we had done that they appreciated. I wasn't used to that. And so good parents make good schools in more ways than one, you know. The kids they send you and the support they give you can make for a very successful school program. And I guess the opposite might be the opposite.
All across Texas and maybe the United States, superintendents have to deal with cheerleaders. You have any short comments you want to make about that category?
Well, you got to set some standards, and then the hard thing about them is staying with them, because
they're spirited.
They're so emotional. I've had more than one parent cry on my desk, you know, because little Susie wasn't a cheerleader for whatever reason it may be. Now, little Susie may be a wonderful young lady, and of course by now she's a middle-aged woman. But it's harder frequently on the parents, I think, when there's a problem with cheerleaders than it is on the girl or boy. I guess you could have never had a problem with a boy cheerleader, but I'm sure they exist just as like. But they get so vested into it. They a lot of them have taught their child, spent money with their children on tumbling lessons or cheerleading school and things like that. And they just got to make cheerleader, and then when they don't, or whenever the child does something that where they're no longer a cheerleader, the parents sometimes don't want to accept that, and it's not any fun.
Your job was pretty much 24/7. You never knew what kind of call you would get or when you would get it. And maintaining good physical and mental health, obviously, for a stressful job was important. How did you deal with that kind of rigor and timeline?
Not as well as I should have. No, I did not have an organized exercise program. I really should have. I did not, you know. I tried to watch what I ate and get plenty of sleep and take care of myself like that, and I did, and I was blessed with fairly good health. Occasional migraine, which I It doesn't necessarily come with the superintendent's job. It did with mine, but I brought them before I was superintendent. But I'm not sure. Lucky, I guess, you know. As far as I did have a lot of night meetings. Curiously enough, in some ways, as we got bigger, I seemed to have less, you know, because when you only have a few schools, they can say, why weren't you at that meeting last night? Well, when you got a lot of schools, you can always say, I was over at that other meeting. But you do have a lot of night meetings, and I became a master of being seen and then slipping away too.
Okay, when you retired, you continued to live in the city, and you gave back in many ways of volunteering. Tell me about some of your activities that you were involved with in the community.
Well, by 1999, I'd figured that I had reached the point where I could retire, fortunately, you know, in a lot of different ways. So I did, but I worked half-time for another 10 years. I worked for a while at the Education Service Center. I worked for a while for Texas Education Agency, mainly monitoring charter schools. And then I worked, which amounted to about half-time, for the county appraisal district. But after that time, I says, no more, and I'm not working another day, and I didn't. So I stayed fairly busy for several years. But I immediately got involved in the library board, and I've been chairman of the library board for more years. I timed out. You can only serve, well, I came in before they had strict limits on it, but I probably have been 8 years chairman of the library board since I retired. I was involved in the county, in this city bond issue, chaired that for the bond issue. Most of it failed, but you know, not the library building. It passed. And was chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee for the city too. So I've been more involved with them really than I have with the school district since I left, but done a few things with the school district, but not a large number.
In your decades here in Pflugerville, obviously we have some town characters, whether they're business folks or leaders. And by characters, I mean roles that they fill. So are there any that you recall that you feel like really made a difference in the town or contributed in some way?
Oh, well, there are a lot of wonderful people in Pflugerville. You know, the Pflugerville Phantom person is still around, and that person has been a tremendous contributor. You take people like Winnie Mae Murchison and others of old Pflugerville roots, they have made more contribution probably than some of us Johnny-come-latelys.
What about, again, back to as superintendent, you've had to work with the city and in times with the county officials to make things happen. Any recollections of special projects with either?
Oh boy, no, nothing is. We had a good relationship with Travis County more early on than later. Not that they turned bad later, but we were more rural, and the county commissioner we had at that time felt more allegiance to the rural than he did to the urban area. No, nothing really comes to mind there. I always had a good relationship with the city itself, but nothing's coming to mind that I can think of.
So what do you see in the next 5, 10, next 50 years for either the school or for the city, the community?
Okay, well, if I look backwards 30, 35 years, it's probably going to be more of the same for the next 30, 35 years. We're going to continue to grow to the east and the northeast, and there's a lot of land. People don't realize quite how much land there is available to the south. Now, I'm not sure that may be Austin boundaries down there, but I could easily see, well, they've got 24,000 kids, something like that now. And when I left in '99, we had 12,000. It'll continue to grow close to that. I'm not sure it will grow at quite the same percentage rate. That may go down, and the available room, but it's going to continue to grow, and the heart of the city will probably move more towards the east. It can't help, you know. Why would it not continue to grow, you know? Now I'm just thinking about straight city. I'm not thinking about school district there, but there's lots of room out there for a lot of houses and a lot of business.
And your wife now has lots of places to shop, or more.
Keeps her pretty busy.
Well, if there's anything else you can think of, certainly you can tell us any other stories that you recall. Oh, I know there's one. Let's talk about the bonfire. Remember those? They used to have bonfires, didn't they?
Yeah, right there where the school administration building is. I can remember one particular incident. They had the bonfire, and it was semi-sanctioned by everybody. I'm not sure that we said go have a bonfire by us. I mean, the administration, school board, and so on. But it was just always been done that way, you know. So you went and had a bonfire. Certainly nothing was growing there because they'd scraped all that dirt off to build the berms on the football stadium, and so it's a fairly safe place. Well, we had the bonfire, and the cheerleaders did their thing, and everything went fine, and everybody was gone home by about 9 o'clock. But some of the local boys, you know, certainly none of our Pflugerville students, were there a couple of hours later. And they were sitting around the bonfire, and they had them maybe a case of Lone Star or something there like that, sitting in the back of their pictures at the bonfire, drinking it, and enjoying the evening pretty late. And this one preacher comes by and sees this huge pile of ashes and fire out here, and he drives up to investigate, you know. Well, there they were, several of the young men in the community out there drinking beer. And this preacher had a fit and came to the next school board meeting over it. We were condoning alcohol use among the young people in the community, and we needed to do something about the bonfire. Well, actually, unfortunately, there were a few incidences in the state, nation, and so on, where there got to be some serious injuries associated with the bonfires, and we started discouraging them because many opportunities for serious problems, and they went away fairly peacefully.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for your service, your volunteerism to the community, to the schools, and for making it the place that it is today.
Thank you very much.